Hello, everybody. Welcome back to the channel Roganautica. I just realized it's cold enough in here. I'm going to put on a long sleeve shirt. Nice to see you again for another of my late night Lovecraft readings. Hmm. Uh, I have, as has become my practice with these, Mel and I asked me to do it, turned off the monetization so that it will not interrupt um, listening to me read live um, with ads. And I am in the middle of trying to move, so if you'd like to help out with the general effort as well as the channel and specifically these readings, eventually I'll get caught up enough to buy a better microphone. The PayPal link is the way to do it. You can also, small donations, of course, you can donate through YouTube with the donate button. I'm going to read the end of the case of Charles Dexter Ward. So I kind of went long in the last reading, so there's only about 45 minutes left of this. If there's a bunch of people in here when I finish reading this, I'll read another one of the Lovecraft stories, one of the shorter ones earlier in the collection that I haven't done since I started numbering standalone streams. We are on what it says is chapter 5. Now, hold up. Do one more thing. I'm going to take some Tylenol. I don't know. Chapter 5. I mean, this book, this novel is divided up into parts and books in odd ways. I think it had already told us it was book 3 or part 3, and that this is part 5 of that. This kind of weirdly pretentious, excessive over elaboration of chapter breaks like this is fairly typical. There it is. Fairly typical of pulp literature of this time. I'm not sure why. Okay. Now I think I'm ready. Marinus Bicknell Willett has no hope that any part of his tale will be believed except by certain sympathetic friends. Hence, he has made no attempt to tell it beyond his most intimate circle. Only a few outsiders have ever heard it repeated, and of these the majority laugh and remark that the doctor surely is getting old. He has been advised to take a long vacation and to shun future cases dealing with mental disturbance. But Mr. Ward knows that the veteran physician speaks only a horrible truth. Did not he himself see the noisome aperture in the bungalow cellar? Did not Willett send him home overcome and ill at 11 o'clock that portentous morning? Did he not telephone the doctor in vain that evening, and again the next day? And had he not driven to the bungalow itself on that following noon, finding his friend unconscious but unharmed on one of the beds upstairs? Willett had been breathing stertorously and opened his eyes slowly when Mr. Ward gave him some brandy fetched from the car. Then he shuddered and screamed, crying out, "That beard, those eyes, God, who are you?" A very strange thing to say to a trim, blue-eyed, clean-shaven gentleman whom he had known from the latter's boyhood. In the bright noon sunlight, the bungalow was unchanged since the previous morning. Willett's clothing bore no disarrangement beyond certain smudges and worn places at the knees, and only a faint acrid odor reminded Mr. Ward of what he had smelt on his son that day he was taken to the hospital. The doctor's flashlight was missing, but his valise was safely there, as empty as when he had brought it. Before indulging in any explanations, and obviously with great moral effort, Willett staggered dizzily down to the cellar and tried the fateful platform before the tubs. It was unyielding. Crossing to where he had left his yet unused tool satchel the day before, he obtained a chisel and began to pry up the stubborn planks one by one. Underneath the smooth concrete was still visible, but of any opening or perforation there was no longer a trace. Nothing yawned this time to sicken the mystified father who had followed the doctor downstairs. Only the smooth concrete underneath the planks. No noisome well, no world of subterranean horrors, no secret library, no Kerwin papers, no nightmare pits of stench and howling, no laboratory or shelves or chiseled formulae, no— Dr. Willett turned pale and clutched at the younger man. "Yesterday," he asked softly, "did you see it, hear, and smell it?" And when Mr. Ward, himself transfixed with dread and wonder, found strength to nod an affirmative, the physician gave a sound half a sigh and half a gasp and nodded in turn. "Then I will tell you," he said. So for an hour, in the sunniest room they could find upstairs, the physician whispered his frightful tale to the wondering father. There was nothing to relate beyond the looming up of that form when the greenish-black vapor from the kylix parted, and Willett was too tired to ask himself what had really occurred. There were futile, bewildered head-shakings from both men, and once Mr. Ward ventured a hushed suggestion, "Do you suppose it would be of any use to dig?" The doctor was silent, for it seemed hardly fitting for any human brain to answer when powers of unknown spheres had so vitally encroached on this side of the great abyss. Again Mr. Ward asked, "But where did it go? It brought you here, you know, and it sealed up the hole somehow." And Willett again let silence answer for him. But after all, this was not the final phase of the matter. Reaching for his handkerchief before rising to leave, Dr. Willett's fingers closed upon a piece of paper in his pocket which had not been there before, and which was companioned by the candles and matches he had seized in the vanished vault. It was a common sheet, torn obviously from the cheap pad in that fabulous room of horror somewhere underground, and the writing upon it was that of an ordinary lead pencil, doubtless the one which had lain beside the pad. It was folded very carelessly, and beyond the faint acrid scent of the cryptic chamber bore no print or mark of any world but this. But in the text itself it did indeed reek with wonder, for here was no script of any wholesome age, but the labored strokes of medieval darkness, scarcely legible to the laymen who now strained over it, yet having combinations of symbols which seemed vaguely familiar. The briefly scrawled message was this, and its mystery lent purpose to the shaken pair, who forthwith walked steadily out to the Ward car and gave orders to be driven first to a quiet dining place and then to the John Hay Library on the hill. I mean, you can see it. I don't know. Does it mirror it? Yeah, you can see it. It looks weirdly like Tolkien's ring writing, which is, like there's so many odd parallels between Lovecraft and Howard with Tolkien and Lewis. At the library, it was easy to find good manuals of paleography, and over these the two men puzzled till the lights of evening shone out from the great chandelier. In the end, they found what was needed. The letters were indeed no fantastic invention, but the normal script of a very dark period. They were the pointed Saxon minuscules of the 8th or 9th century A.D., and brought with them memories of an uncouth time when under a fresh Christian veneer ancient faiths and ancient rites stirred stealthily, and the pale moon of Britain looked sometimes on strange deeds in the Roman ruins of Caerleon and Hexham, and by the towers along Hadrian's crumbling wall. The words were in such Latin as a barbarous age might remember. Corvinus Necandas est, cadaver aqua forti dissolvendum, nec aliquid retenendum. Nec aliquid retenendum. Tace ut potes. I got most of that right. Which may roughly be translated, Kerwin must be killed. The body must be dissolved in aquafortis, nor must anything be retained. Keep silence as best you are able. I'm checking his Latin. It's okay. He should have had a better Latin advisor. I don't have fluent Latin anymore, but I used to. I used to be a serious Latin nerd. Willett and Mr. Ward were mute and baffled. They had met the unknown and found that they lacked emotions to respond to it as they vaguely believed they ought. With Willett, especially, the capacity for receiving fresh impressions of awe was well nigh exhausted, and both men sat still and helpless till the closing of the library forced them to leave. Then they drove listlessly to the Ward mansion in Prospect Street and talked to no purpose into the night. The doctor rested toward morning, but did not go home, and he was still there Sunday noon when a telephone message came from the detectives who had been assigned to look up Dr. Allen. Mr. Ward, who was pacing nervously about in a dressing gown, answered the call in person and told the men to come up early the next day when he heard their report was almost ready. Both Willett and he were glad that this phase of the matter was taking form, for whatever the origin of the strange minuscule message, it seemed certain that the Kerwin, who must be destroyed, could be no other than the bearded and spectacled stranger. Charles had feared this man, and had said in the frantic note that he must be killed and dissolved in acid. Allen, moreover, had been receiving letters from the strange wizards in Europe under the name of Kerwin, and palpably regarded himself as an avatar of the bygone necromancer. And now, from a fresh and unknown source, had come a message saying that Kerwin must be killed and dissolved in acid. The linkage was too unmistakable to be factitious. And besides, was not Allen planning to murder young Ward upon the advice of the creature called Hutchinson? Of course, the letter they had seen had never reached the bearded stranger, but from its text they could see that Allen had already formed plans for dealing with the youth if he grew too squeamish. Without doubt, Allen must be apprehended, and even if the most drastic directions were not carried out, he must be placed where he could inflict no harm upon Charles Ward. That afternoon, hoping against hope to extract some gleam of information anent the inmost mysteries from the only available one capable of giving it, the father and the doctor went down the bay and called on young Charles at the hospital. Simply and gravely, Willett told him all he had found, and noticed how pale he turned as each description made certain the truth of the discovery. The physician employed as much dramatic effect as he could, and watched for a wincing on Charles's part when he approached the matter of the covered pits and the nameless hybrids within. But Ward did not wince. Willett paused, and his voice grew indignant as he spoke of how the things were starving. He taxed the youth with shocking inhumanity and shivered when only a sardonic laugh came in reply. For Charles, having dropped as useless his pretense that the crypt did not exist, seemed to see some ghastly jest in this affair, and chuckled hoarsely at something which amused him. Then he whispered in accents doubly terrible because of the cracked voice he used, "Damn 'em, they do eat, but they don't need to. That's the rare part. A month, you say, without food? Lord, sir, you be modest. Do you know that was the joke on poor old Whipple with his virtuous bluster? Kill everything off, would he? Why, dammy, he was half deaf with the noise from outside and never saw or heard aught from the wells. He never dreamed they were there at all. Devil take you, those cursed things have been howling down there ever since Kerwin was done for 157 years gone." But no more than this could Willett get from the youth. Horrified, yet almost convinced against his will, he went on with his tale in the hope that some incident might startle his auditor out of the mad composure he maintained. Looking at the youth's face, the doctor could not but feel a kind of terror at the changes which recent months had wrought. Truly, the boy had drawn down nameless horrors from the skies. When the room with the formulae and the greenish dust was mentioned, Charles showed his first sign of animation. A quizzical look overspread his face as he heard what Willett had read on the pad, and he ventured the mild statement that those notes were old ones, of no possible significance to anyone not deeply initiated in the history of magic. But, he added, had you but known the words to bring up that which I had out in the cup, you had not been here to tell me this. 'Twas number 118, and I conceive you would have shook had you looked it up in my list in t'other room. 'Twas never raised by me, but I meant to have it up that day when you came to invite me hither. Oh, I forgot to keep doing the weird voice for him from the other night. Sorry. Then Willett told of the formula he had spoken and of the greenish-black smoke which had arisen. And as he did so, he saw true fear dawn for the first time on Charles Ward's face. It came, and you be here alive? As Ward croaked the words, his voice seemed almost to burst free of its trammels and sink to cavernous abysses of uncanny resonance. Willett, gifted with a flash of inspiration, believed he saw the situation and wove into his reply a caution from a letter he remembered. Number 118, you say, but don't forget that stones are all changed now in 9 grounds out of 10. You are never sure till you question. And then, without warning, he drew forth the minuscule message and flashed it before the patient's eyes. He could have wished no stronger result, for Charles Ward fainted forthwith. All this conversation, of course, had been conducted with the greatest secrecy, lest the resident alienists accuse the father and the physician of encouraging a madman in his delusions. Unaided, too, Dr. Willett and Mr. Ward picked up the stricken youth and placed him on the couch. In reviving, the patient mumbled many times of some word which he must get to Orne and Hutchinson at once. So when his consciousness seemed fully back, the doctor told him that of those strange creatures, at least one was his bitter enemy, and had given Dr. Allen advice for his assassination. This revelation produced no visible effect, and before it was made, the visitors could see that their host had already the look of a hunted man. After that he would converse no more, so Willett and the father departed presently, leaving behind a caution against the bearded Allen, to which the youth only replied that this individual was very safely taken care of and could do no one any harm even if he wished. This was said with an almost evil chuckle, very painful to hear. They did not worry about any communications Charles might indite to that monstrous pair in Europe, since they knew that the hospital authorities seized all outgoing mail for censorship and would pass no wild or outre-looking missive. There is, however, a curious sequel to the matter of Orne and Hutchinson, if such indeed the exiled wizards were. Moved by some vague presentiment amidst the horrors of that period, Willett arranged with an international press-cutting bureau for accounts of notable current crimes and accidents in Prague and in eastern Transylvania, and after 6 months believed that he had found 2 very significant things amongst the multifarious items he received and had translated. One was the total wrecking of a house by night in the oldest quarter of Prague, and the disappearance of the evil old man called Joseph Nadek, who had dwelt in it alone ever since anyone could remember. The other was a Titan explosion in the Transylvanian mountains east of Rakus, and the utter extirpation with all its inmates of the ill-regarded Castle Ferenczi, whose master was so badly spoken of by peasants and soldiery alike that he would shortly have been summoned to Bucharest for serious questioning, had not this incident cut off a career already so long as to antedate all common memory. Willett maintains that the hand which wrote those minuscules was able to wield stronger weapons as well, and that while Kerwin was left to him to dispose of, the writer felt able to find and deal with Orne and Hutchinson itself. Of what their fate may have been, the doctor strives sedulously not to think. 6. The following morning, Dr. Willett hastened to the Ward home to be present when the detectives arrived. Allen's destruction or imprisonment, or Kerwin's, if one might regard the tacit claim to reincarnation as valid, he felt must be accomplished at any cost, and he communicated this conviction to Mr. Ward as they sat waiting for the men to come. They were downstairs this time, for the upper parts of the house were beginning to be shunned because of a peculiar nauseousness which hung indefinitely about, a nauseousness which the older servants connected with some curse left by the vanished Kerwin portrait. At 9 o'clock, the 3 detectives presented themselves and immediately delivered all that they had to say. They had not, regrettably enough, located the brava Tony Gomez as they had wished, nor had they found the least trace of Dr. Allen's source or present whereabouts, but they had managed to unearth a considerable number of local impressions and facts concerning the reticent stranger. Allen had struck Pawtuxet people as a vaguely unnatural being, and there was a universal belief that his thick sandy beard was either dyed or false, a belief conclusively upheld by the finding of such a false beard together with a pair of dark glasses in his room at the fateful bungalow. His voice, Mr. Ward could well testify from his one telephone conversation, had a depth and hollowness that could not be forgotten, and his glance seemed malign even through his smoked and horn-rimmed glasses. One shopkeeper, in the course of negotiations, had seen a specimen of his handwriting and declared it was very queer and crabbed, this being confirmed by penciled notes of no clear meaning found in his room and identified by the merchant. In connection with the vampirism rumors of the preceding summer, a majority of the gossips believed that Allen, rather than Ward, was the actual vampire. Statements were also obtained from the officials who had visited the bungalow after the unpleasant incident of the motor truck robbery. They had felt less of the sinister in Dr. Allen, but had recognized him as the dominant figure in the queer, shadowy cottage. The place had been too dark for them to observe him clearly, but they would know him again if they saw him. His beard had looked odd, and they thought he had some slight scar above his dark spectacled right eye. As for the detective's search of Allen's room, it yielded nothing definite save the beard and glasses, and several penciled notes in a crabbed writing which Willett at once saw was identical with that shared by the old Kerwin manuscripts and by the voluminous recent notes of young Ward found in the vanished catacombs of horror. Dr. Willett and Mr. Ward caught something of a profound, subtle, and insidious cosmic fear from this data as it was gradually unfolded, and almost trembled in following up the vague, mad thought which had simultaneously reached their minds. The false beard and glasses, the crabbed Kerwin penmanship, the old portrait and its tiny scar, and the altered youth in the hospital with such a scar, that deep, hollow voice on the telephone. Was it not of this that Mr. Ward was reminded when his son barked forth those pitiable tones to which he now claimed to be reduced? Who had ever seen Charles and Allen together? Yes, the officials had once, but who later on? Was it not when Allen left that Charles suddenly lost his growing fright and began to live wholly at the bungalow? Kerwin, Allen, Ward, in what blasphemous and abominable fusion had two ages and two persons become involved? That damnable resemblance of the picture to Charles, had it not used to stare and follow the boy around the room with its eyes? Why, too, did both Allen and Charles copy Joseph Kerwin's handwriting even when alone and off guard? And then the frightful work of those people, the lost crypt of horrors that had aged the doctor overnight, the starved monsters in the noisome pits, the awful formula which had yielded such nameless results, the message in minuscules found in Willett's pocket, the papers and the letters, and all the talk of graves and salts and discoveries, whither did everything lead? In the end, Mr. Ward did the most sensible thing. Steeling himself against any realization of why he did it, he gave the detectives an article to be shown to such Pawtuxet shopkeepers as had seen the portentous Dr. Allen. That article was a photograph of his luckless son, on which he now carefully drew in ink the pair of heavy glasses and the black pointed beard which the man had brought from Allen's room. For 2 hours he waited with the doctor in the oppressive house where fear and miasma were slowly gathering as the empty panel in the upstairs library leered and leered and leered. Then the men returned. Yes, the altered photograph was a very passable likeness of Dr. Allen. Mr. Ward turned pale, and Willett wiped a suddenly dampened brow with his handkerchief. Allen, Ward, Kerwin, it was becoming too hideous for coherent thought. What had the boy called out of the void, and what had it done to him? What really had happened from first to last? Who was this Allen who sought to kill Charles as too squeamish? And why had his destined victim said in the postscript to that frantic letter that he must be so completely obliterated in acid? Why, too, had the minuscule message, of whose origin no one dared think, said that Kerwin must be likewise obliterated? What was the change, and when had the final stage occurred? That day when his frantic note was received, he had been nervous all the morning. Then there was an alteration. He had slipped out unseen and swaggered boldly in past the men hired to guard him. That was the time when he was out. But no, had he not cried out in terror as he entered his study, this very room? What had he found there? Or wait, what had found him? That simulacrum which brushed boldly in without having been seen to go, was that an alien shadow and a horror forcing itself upon a trembling figure which had never gone out at all? Had not the butler spoken of queer noises? Willett rang for the man and asked him some low-toned questions. It had, surely enough, been a bad business. There had been noises, a cry, a gasp, a choking, and a sort of clattering or creaking or thumping or all of these. And Mr. Charles was not the same when he stalked out without a word. The butler shivered as he spoke, and sniffed at the heavy air that blew down from some open window upstairs. Terror had settled definitely upon the house, and only the business-like detectives failed to imbibe a full measure of it. Even they were restless, for this case had held vague elements in the background which pleased them not at all. Dr. Willett was thinking deeply and rapidly, and his thoughts were terrible ones. Now and then he would almost break into muttering as he ran over in his head a new, appalling, and increasingly conclusive chain of nightmare happenings. Then Mr. Ward made a sign that the conference was over, and everyone save him and the doctor left the room. It was noon now, but shadows as of coming night seemed to engulf the phantom-haunted mansion. Willett began talking very seriously to his host, and urged that he leave a great deal of the future investigation to him. There would be, he predicted, certain obnoxious elements which a friend could bear better than a relative. As family physician, he must have a free hand, and the first thing he required was a period alone and undisturbed in the abandoned library upstairs, where the ancient overmantel had gathered about itself an aura of noisome horror more intense than when Joseph Kerwin's features themselves glanced slyly down from the painted panel. Mr. Ward, you know what? Let me sip some water. I'm going to get mealy now. Hold on. And take the opportunity, since people are coming in, to remind you, thank you for watching and listening. I have turned off the monetization so you won't be interrupted with ads. That is, we won't be interrupted. So if you want to throw me a tip, paypal.me/Roganautica. It's in the pinned comment. Thanks. I won't bring it up again. Because we're not here for the money, we're here for our health. That being said, you can give me money. Where was I? Right, glanced slyly down from the painted panel. Mr. Ward, dazed by the flood of grotesque morbidities and unthinkably maddening suggestions that poured in upon him from every side, could only acquiesce. And half an hour later, the doctor was locked in the shunned room with the paneling from Olney Court. The father, listening outside, heard fumbling sounds of moving and rummaging as the moments passed, and finally a wrench and a creak as if a tight cupboard door were being opened. Then there was a muffled cry, a kind of snorting choke, and a hasty slamming of whatever had been opened. Almost at once the key rattled, and Willett appeared in the hall, haggard and ghastly, and demanding wood for the real fireplace on the south wall of the room. The furnace was not enough, he said, and the electric log had little practical use. Longing, yet not daring to ask questions, Mr. Ward gave the requisite orders, and a man brought some stout pine logs, shuddering as he entered the tainted air of the library, to place them in the grate. Willett, meanwhile, had gone up to the dismantled laboratory and brought down a few odds and ends not included in the moving of the July before. They were in a covered basket, and Mr. Ward never saw what they were. Then the doctor locked himself in the library once more, and by the clouds of smoke which rolled down past the windows from the chimney, it was known that he had lighted the fire. Later, After a great rustling of newspapers, that odd wrench and creaking were heard again, followed by a thumping which none of the eavesdroppers liked. Thereafter, two suppressed cries of Willet's were heard, and hard upon these came a swishing rustle of indefinable hatefulness. Finally, the smoke that the wind beat down from the chimney grew very dark and acrid, and everyone wished that the weather had spared them this choking and venomous inundation of peculiar fumes. Mr. Ward's head reeled, and the servants all clustered together in a knot to watch the horrible black smoke swoop down. After an age of waiting, the vapors seemed to lighten, and half-formless sounds of scraping, sweeping, and other minor operations were heard behind the bolted door. And at last, after the slamming of some cupboard within, Willett made his appearance, sad, pale, and haggard, and bearing the cloth-draped basket he had taken from the upstairs laboratory. He had left the window open, and into that once accursed room was pouring a wealth of pure, wholesome air to mix with a queer new smell of disinfectants. The ancient overmantel still lingered, but it seemed robbed of malignity now, and rose as calm and stately in its white paneling as if it had never borne the picture of Joseph Curwen. Night was coming on, yet this time its shadows held no latent fright, but only a gentle melancholy. Of what he had done the doctor would never speak. To Mr. Ward he said, "I can answer no questions, but I will say that there are different kinds of magic. I have made a great purgation, and those in this house will sleep the better for it." 7. That Dr. Willett's purgation had been an ordeal almost as nerve-wracking in its way as his hideous wandering in the vanished crypt is shown by the fact that the elderly physician gave out completely as soon as he reached home that evening. For 3 days he rested constantly in his room, though servants later muttered something about having heard him after midnight on Wednesday, when the outer door softly opened and closed with phenomenal softness. Oh my God, softly? With softness? We're going to have to report him to the Department of Redundancy Department. Thank you. Thank you very much. I stole that joke. It's not mine. Still good, though. Still a good joke. Servants' imaginations, fortunately, are limited. Yeah, with that attitude. Servants' imaginations, fortunately, are limited. Else comment might have been excited by an item in Thursday's evening bulletin which ran as follows: North End ghouls active again. After a lull of 10 months since the dastardly vandalism in the Whedon lot at the North Burial Ground, a nocturnal prowler was glimpsed early this morning in the same cemetery by Robert Hart, the night watchman. Happening to glance for a moment from his shelter at about 2 a.m., Hart observed the glow of a lantern or pocket torch not far to the northwest, and upon opening the door detected the figure of a man with a trowel very plainly silhouetted against a nearby electric light. At once starting in pursuit, he saw the figure dart hurriedly toward the main entrance, gaining the street and losing himself among the shadows before approach or capture was possible. Like the first of the ghouls active during the past year, this intruder had done no real damage before detection. A vacant part of the ward lot showed signs of a little superficial digging, but nothing even nearly the size of a grave had been attempted, and no previous grave had been disturbed. Hart, who cannot describe the prowler except as a small man probably having a full beard, inclines to the view that all three of the digging incidents have a common source. But police from the second station think otherwise on account of the savage nature of the second incident, where an ancient coffin was removed and its headstone violently shattered. The first of the incidents, in which it is thought an attempt to bury something was frustrated, occurred a year ago last March, and has been attributed to bootleggers seeking a cache. It is possible, says Sergeant Riley, that this third affair is of similar nature. Officers at the second station are taking especial pains to capture the gang of miscreants responsible for these repeated outrages. All day Thursday, Dr. Willett rested as if recuperating from something past or nerving himself for something to come. In the evening, he wrote a note to Mr. Ward, which was delivered the next morning and which caused the half-dazed parent to ponder long and deeply. Mr. Ward had not been able to go down to business since the shock of Monday with its baffling reports and its sinister purgation, but he found something calming about the doctor's letter in spite of the despair it seemed to promise and the fresh mysteries it seemed to evoke. 10 Barnes Street, Providence, Rhode Island, April 12th, 1928. Is the header on the letter. Dear Theodore, I feel that I must say a word to you before doing what I am going to do tomorrow. It will conclude the terrible business we have been going through, for I feel that no spade is ever likely to reach that monstrous place we know of. But I'm afraid it won't set your mind at rest unless I expressly assure you how very conclusive it is. You have known me ever since you were a small boy, so I think you will not distrust me when I hint that some matters are best left undecided and unexplored. It is better that you attempt no further speculation as to Charles's case, and almost imperative that you tell his mother nothing more than she already suspects. When I call on you tomorrow, Charles will have escaped. That is all which need remain in anyone's mind. He was mad, and he escaped. You can tell his mother gently and gradually about the mad part when you stop sending the typed notes in his name. I'd advise you to join her in Atlantic City and take a rest yourself. God knows you need one after this shock, as I do myself. I'm going south for a while to calm down and brace up. So don't ask me any questions when I call. It may be that something will go wrong, but I'll tell you if it does. I don't think it will. There will be nothing more to worry about, for Charles will be very, very safe. He is now, safer than you dream. You need hold no fears about Alan and who or what he is. He forms as much a part of the past as Joseph Curwen's picture, and when I ring your doorbell, you may feel certain that there is no such person. And what wrote that minuscule message will never trouble you or yours. But you must steel yourself to melancholy and prepare your wife to do the same. I must tell you frankly that Charles's escape will not mean his restoration to you. He has been afflicted with a peculiar disease, as you must realize from the subtle physical as well as mental changes in him, and you must not hope to see him again. Have only this consolation, that he was never a fiend or even truly a madman, but only an eager, studious, and curious boy whose love of mystery and of the past was his undoing. He stumbled on things no mortal ought ever to know, and reached back through the years as no one ever should reach, and something came out of those years to engulf him. And now comes the matter in which I must ask you to trust me most of all, for there will be, indeed, no uncertainty about Charles's fate. In about a year, say, you can, if you wish, devise a suitable account of the end, for the boy will be no more. You can put up a stone in your lot at the North Burial Ground, exactly 10 feet west of your father's and facing the same way, and that will mark the true resting place of your son. Nor need you fear that it will mark any abnormality or changeling. The ashes in that grave will be those of your own unaltered bone and sinew, of the real Charles Dexter Ward, whose mind you watched from infancy, the real Charles with the olive mark on his hip and without the black witch mark on his chest or the pit on his forehead. The Charles who never did actual evil and who will have paid with his life for his squeamishness. That is all. Charles will have escaped, and a year from now you can put up his stone. Do not question me tomorrow, and believe that the honor of your ancient family remains untainted now, as it has been at all times in the past. With profoundest sympathy and exhortations to fortitude, calmness, and resignation, I am ever sincerely your friend, Marinus B. Willett. So on the morning of Friday, April 13th, 1928, Marinus Bicknell Willett visited the room of Charles Dexter Ward at Dr. Waite's private hospital on Conanicut Island. The youth, though making no attempt to evade his caller, was in a sullen mood and seemed disinclined to open the conversation which Willett obviously desired. The doctor's discovery of the crypt and his monstrous experience therein had, of course, created a new source of embarrassment, so that both hesitated perceptibly after the interchange of a few strained formalities. Then a new element of constraint crept in, as Ward seemed to read behind the doctor's mask-like face a terrible purpose which had never been there before. The patient quailed, conscious that since the last visit there had been a change whereby the solicitous family physician had given place to the ruthless and implacable avenger. Ward actually turned pale, and the doctor was the first to speak. More, he said, has been found out, and I must warn you fairly that a reckoning is due. Digging again and coming upon more poor starving pets, was the ironic reply. It was evident that the youth meant to show bravado to the last. No, Willett slowly rejoined. This time I did not have to dig. We have had men looking up Dr. Allen, and they found the false beard and spectacles in the bungalow. Excellent, commented the disquieted host in an effort to be wittily insulting, and I trust they proved more becoming than the beard and glasses you now have on. They would become you very well, came the even and studied response, as indeed they seem to have done. As Willett said this, it almost seemed as though a cloud passed over the sun, though there was no change in the shadows on the floor. Then Ward ventured, "And is this what asks so hotly for a reckoning? Suppose a man does find it now and then useful to be twofold." "No," said Willett gravely, "again you are wrong. It is no business of mine if any man seeks duality, provided he has any right to exist at all, and provided he does not destroy what called him out of space." Ward now started violently. "Well, sir, what have you found, and what do you want with me?" The doctor let a little time elapse before replying, as if choosing his words for an effective answer. "I have found," he finally intoned, "something in a cupboard behind an ancient overmantel where a picture once was, and I have burned it and buried the ashes where the grave of Charles Dexter Ward ought to be." The madman choked and sprang from the chair in which he had been sitting. "Damn you, who did you tell? And who'll believe it was he after these full 2 months with me alive? What do you mean to do?" Willett, though a small man, actually took on a kind of judicial majesty as he calmed the patient with a gesture. "I have told no one. This is no common case. It is a madness out of time and a horror from beyond the spheres which no police or lawyers or courts or alienists could ever fathom or grapple with. Thank God some chance has left inside me the spark of imagination that I might not go astray in thinking out this thing. You cannot deceive me, Joseph Kerwin, for I know that your accursed magic is true. I know how you wove the spell that brooded outside the years and fastened on your double and descendant. I know how you drew him into the past and got him to raise you up from your detestable grave. I know how he kept you hidden in his laboratory while you studied modern things and roved abroad as a vampire by night, and how you later showed yourself in beard and glasses that no one might wonder at your godless likeness to him. I know what you resolved to do when he balked at your monstrous rifling of the world's tombs, and at what you planned afterward, and I know how you did it. You left off your beard and glasses and fooled the guards around the house. They thought it was he who went in, and they thought it was he who came out when you had strangled and hidden him. But you hadn't reckoned on the different contents of two minds. You were a fool, Kerwin, to fancy that a mere visual identity would be enough. Why didn't you think of the speech, the voice, and the handwriting? It hasn't worked, you see, after all. You know better than I who or what wrote that message in minuscules, but I will warn you it was not written in vain. There are abominations and blasphemies which must be stamped out, and I believe that the writer of those words will attend to Orne and Hutchinson. One of those creatures wrote you once, do not call up any that you cannot put down. You were undone once before, perhaps in that very way, and it may be that your own evil magic will undo you all again. Kerwin, a man can't tamper with nature beyond certain limits, and every horror you have woven will rise up to wipe you out. But here the doctor was cut short by a convulsive cry from the creature before him. Hopelessly at bay, weaponless, and knowing that any show of physical violence would bring a score of attendants to the doctor's rescue, Joseph Kerwin had recourse to his one ancient ally and began a series of cabalistic motions with his four fingers as his deep, hollow voice, now unconcealed by feigned hoarseness, bellowed out the opening words of a terrible formula. Per Adonai Elohim, Adonai Jehovah, Adonai Sabaoth, Metraton, But Willett was too quick for him. Even as the dogs in the yard outside began to howl, and even as a chill wind sprang suddenly up from the bay, the doctor commenced the solemn and measured intonation of that which he had meant all along to recite. An eye for an eye, magic for magic. Let the outcome show how well the lesson of the abyss has been learned. So in a clear voice, Meredith Bicknell Willett began the second of that pair of formulae, whose first had raised the writer of those minuscules. The cryptic invocation whose heading was the dragon's tail, sign of the descending node. I'm not going to try to read that. At the very first word from Willett's mouth, the previously commenced formula of the patient stopped short. Unable to speak, the monster made wild motions with his arms until they too were arrested. When the awful name of Yog-Sothoth was uttered, the hideous change began. It was not merely a dissolution, but rather a transformation or recapitulation. And Willett shut his eyes, lest he faint before the rest of the incantation could be pronounced. But he did not faint, and that man of unholy centuries and forbidden secrets never troubled the world again. The madness out of time had subsided, and the case of Charles Dexter Ward was closed. Opening his eyes before staggering out of that room of horror, Dr. Willett saw that what he had kept in memory had not been kept amiss. There had, as he had predicted, been no need for acids, for like his accursed picture a year before, Joseph Curwen now lay scattered on the floor as a thin coating of fine bluish-gray dust. The end. I'm tempted to try to read. The Color Out of Space is the next story, but it's kind of long. I thought I would read another short one, since that wasn't quite even an hour. But I don't think there are any actual short ones left. We'll back up to one of the earlier ones. Thanks for being here, guys. I'm Rogan. If you haven't been here before, thank you for the dono, the Waits Experience. I was going to say, I have turned off the ads. And so I encourage you to give me a tip in the paypal.me/Roganautica tip jar. Also, small donations, there's a dono button. I split that money with YouTube. So if you donate through that, then you're supporting the house as well, not just me. I'm looking back at the list of the shorter stories at the beginning of the book. Yeah, I'm going to... Yeah, I'm going to read the statement of Randolph Carter. Pardon my cough. I've read this before. I've read a bunch of these earlier, shorter Lovecraft stories in random earlier live streams at different times. I hadn't yet settled on doing these readings as standalone late night live streams. Probably very few, if any of you, heard me read it the first time I read this story. This one's based on a dream Lovecraft had. I don't remember. He dreamt that he was hanging out with one of the other Weird Tales writers, and they had this experience that he describes in the short story in the dream. I want to say maybe it was Hoffman Price, E. Hoffman Price, who is about half a dozen of the more talented among the Weird Tales, regularly publishing Weird Tales writers, were in close correspondence with Lovecraft. through which, of course, he exercised a lot of literary influence over them and elevated their work, presumably, in the process. The Statement of Randolph Carter, again by Howard Phillips Lovecraft. I repeat to you, gentlemen, that your inquisition is fruitless. Detain me here forever if you will, confine or execute me if you must have a victim to propitiate the illusion you call justice. But I can say no more than I have said already. Everything that I can remember I have told with perfect candor. Nothing has been distorted or concealed. And if anything remains vague, it is only because of the dark cloud which has come over my mind, that cloud and the nebulous nature of the horrors which brought it upon me. Again, I say I do not know what has become of Harley Ward, though I think, almost hope, that he is in peaceful oblivion, if there be anywhere so blessed a thing. It is true that I have for 5 years been his closest friend and a partial sharer of his terrible researches into the unknown. I will not deny, though my memory is uncertain and indistinct, that this witness of yours may have seen us together, as he says, on the Gainesville Pike, walking toward Big Cypress Swamp at 11:30 on that awful night. That we bore electric lanterns, spades, and a curious coil of wire with attached instruments, I will even affirm, for these things all played a part in the single hideous scene which remains burned into my shaken recollection. But of what followed, and of the reason I was found alone and dazed on the edge of the swamp next morning, I must insist that I know nothing save what I have told you over and over again. You say to me there is nothing in the swamp or near it which could form the setting of that frightful episode. I reply that I know nothing beyond what I saw. Vision or nightmare it may have been. Vision or nightmare I fervently hope it was. Yet it is all that my mind retains of what took place in those shocking hours after we left the sight of men. And why Harley Warren did not return, he or his shade or some nameless thing I cannot describe alone can tell. Wait, that's three. Three options. Sorry, I've been trying to mute it when I cough because I know people are falling asleep while they listen, and like a sudden cough can be really annoying. As I have said before, the weird studies of Harley Warren were well known to me and to some extent shared by me. Of his vast collection of strange, rare books on forbidden subjects, I have read all that are written in the languages of which I am master, but these are few as compared with those in languages I cannot understand. Most, I believe, are in Arabic, and the fiend-inspired book which brought on the end, the book which he carried in his pocket out of the world, was written in characters whose like I never saw elsewhere. Warren would never tell me just what was in that book. As to the nature of our studies, must I say again that I no longer retain full comprehension? It seems to me rather merciful that I do not, for they were terrible studies, which I pursued more through reluctant fascination than through actual inclination. So, German. I'm thinking of Mark Twain's essay about the hideousness of the German language. If nobody's ever read that, you should look it up. It's very funny. Warren always dominated me, and sometimes I feared him. I remember how I shuddered at his facial expression on the night before the awful happening, when he talked so incessantly of his theory, why certain corpses never decay, but rest firm and fat in their tombs for 1,000 years. But I do not fear him now, for I suspect that he has known horrors beyond my ken. Now I fear for him. Once more I say that I have no clear idea of our object on that night. Certainly it had much to do with something in the book which Warren carried with him, that ancient book in undecipherable characters which had come to him from India a month before. But I swear I do not know what it was that we expected to find. Your witness says he saw us at 11:30 on the Gainesville Pike, headed for Big Cypress Swamp. This is probably true, but I have no distinct memory of it. The picture seared into my soul is of one scene only, and the hour must have been long after midnight, for a waning crescent moon was high in the vaporous heavens. The place was an ancient cemetery, so ancient that I trembled at the manifold signs of immemorial years. Yeah, in Florida. I guess, actually, the oldest cemeteries in the country are in Florida, in St. Petersburg. So ancient that I trembled at the manifold signs of immemorial years. It was in a deep, damp hollow, overgrown with rank grass, moss, and curious creeping weeds, and filled with a vague stench which my idle fancy associated absurdly with rotting stone. On every hand were the signs of neglect and decrepitude, and I seemed haunted by the notion that Warren and I were the first living creatures to invade a lethal silence of centuries. Over the valley's rim, a wan, waning crescent moon peered through the noisome vapors that seemed to emanate from unheard-of catacombs, and by its feeble, wavering beams I could distinguish a repellent array of antique slabs, urns, cenotaphs, and mausolean facades, all crumbling, moss-grown, and moisture-stained, and partly concealed by the gross luxuriance of the unhealthy vegetation. My first vivid impression of my own presence in this terrible necropolis concerns the act of pausing with Warren before a certain half-obliterated sculpture. Sepulchre, not sculpture. I got distracted. Hey, Sliminy Cricket, 420, funny name. Thanks. I try to do this for at least an hour every night. I do hang out with the chat and comment sometimes and interrupt, which is one of the reasons why I do it live. It's better. It's better when somebody reads to you live. Wait, where was I? Oh, right, sepulcher. I misread as... Okay. My first vivid impression of my own presence in this terrible necropolis concerns the act of pausing with Warren before a certain half-obliterated sepulcher, and of throwing down some burdens which we seemed to have been carrying. I now observed that I had with me an electric lantern and 2 spades, whilst my companion was supplied with a similar lantern and a portable telephone outfit. No word was uttered, for the spot and the task seemed known to us, and without delay we seized our spades and commenced to clear away the grass, weeds, and drifted earth from the flat, archaic mortuary. After uncovering the entire surface, which consisted of 3 immense granite slabs, we stepped back some distance to survey the charnel scene, and Warren approached to make some mental calculations. Then he returned to the sepulchre and, using his spade as a lever, sought to pry up the slab lying nearest to a stony ruin which may have been a monument in its day. He did not succeed, and motioned for me to come to his assistance. Finally, our combined strength loosened the stone, which we raised and tipped to one side. Thank you, Deb Roberts, for subscribing. I encourage you all to subscribe. Also, you can donate through the dono button, or if you want to help me move next month, end of this month, paypal.me/Roganautica. I'm not going to mention it again. I don't like flogging it. I turn the ads off so that they won't interrupt me reading live. And while I do need money and I'm happy to get it, I'm doing this for my health and yours, not for the cash. Yes, it's healthy. Reading H.P. Lovecraft is healthy. Also listening to it. Hey, Gandalf Smith. Nice to meet you, Mr. Smith. Thanks for coming in. Right, a portable telephone, the flat archaic mortuary, yes. 3 slabs. They tipped the lid to one side. Thank you, Deb. The removal of the slab revealed a black aperture, from which rushed an effluence of miasmal gases so nauseous that we started back in horror. After an interval, however, we approached the pit again, and found the exhalations less unbearable. Our lanterns disclosed the top of a flight of stone steps, dripping with some detestable ichor of the inner earth, and bordered by moist walls encrusted with niter. And now, for the first time, my memory records verbal discourse, Warren addressing me at length in his mellow tenor voice, a voice singularly unperturbed by our awesome surroundings. I'm sorry to have to ask you to stay on the surface, he said, but it would be a crime to let anyone with your frail nerves go down there. You can't imagine, even from what you have read and from what I've told you, the things I shall have to see and do. It's fiendish work, Carter, and I doubt if any man without ironclad sensibilities could ever see it through and come up alive and sane. I don't wish to offend you, and heaven knows I'd be glad enough to have you with me, but the responsibility is in a certain sense mine, and I couldn't drag a bundle of nerves like you down to probable death or madness. I tell you, you can't imagine what the thing is really like. But I promise to keep you informed over the telephone of every move. You see, I've enough wire here to reach to the center of the earth and back. I can still hear, in memory, those coolly spoken words, and I can still remember my remonstrances. I seemed desperately anxious to accompany my friend into those sepulchral depths, yet he proved inflexibly obdurate. At one time, he threatened to abandon the expedition if I remained insistent, a threat which proved effective since he alone held the key to the thing. All this I can still remember, though I no longer know what manner of thing we sought. After he had secured my reluctant acquiescence in his design, Warren picked up the reel of wire and adjusted the instruments. At his nod, I took one of the latter and seated myself upon an aged, discolored gravestone close by the newly uncovered aperture. Then he shook my hand, shouldered the coil of wire, and disappeared within that indescribable ossuary. For a moment I kept sight of the glow of his lantern, and heard the rustle of the wire as he laid it down after him, but the glow soon disappeared abruptly, as if a turn in the stone staircase had been encountered, and the sound died away almost as quickly. I was alone, yet bound to the unknown depths by those magic strands whose insulated surface lay green beneath the struggling beams of that waning crescent moon. In the lone silence of that hoary and deserted city of the dead, my mind conceived the most ghastly fantasies and delusions, and the grotesque shrines and monoliths seemed to assume a hideous personality, a half-sentience. Amorphous shadows seemed to lurk in the darker recesses of the weed-choked hollow and to flit as in some blasphemous ceremonial procession past the portals of the moldering tombs in the hillside, shadows which could not have been cast by that pallid, peering crescent moon. I constantly consulted my watch by the light of my electric lantern and listened with feverish anxiety at the receiver of the telephone, but for more than a quarter of an hour heard nothing. Then a faint clicking came from the instrument, and I called down to my friend in a tense voice. Apprehensive as I was nevertheless unprepared for the words which came up from that uncanny vault in accents more alarmed and quivering than any I had heard before from Harley Warren. He who had so calmly left me a little while previously, now called from below in a shaky whisper more portentous than the loudest shriek, "God, if you could see what I am seeing!" You need to get my lap zone. Oh, yeah. Is it Snuggles time? This is my cat zone, by the way, if you don't matter. You're in Ohio? Me too. I'm in Lima. Ohio. You want to drive to Mississippi? We'll talk about it later. Are you going to relax, Zoe? Where was I? Right. God, if you could see what I am seeing! I could not answer. Speechless, I could only wait. Then came the frenzied tones again. Carter, it's terrible, monstrous, unbelievable. This time my voice did not fail me, and I poured into the transmitter a flood of excited questions. Terrified, I continued to repeat, Warren, what is it? What is it? You're all right, Zoe. Once more came the voice of my friend, still hoarse with fear and now apparently tinged with despair. I can't tell you, Carter. It's too utterly beyond thought. I dare not tell you. No man could know it and live. Great God, I never dreamed of this. Stillness again, save for my now incoherent torrent of shuddering inquiry. Then the voice of Warren in a pitch of wilder consternation. Carter, for the love of God, put back the slab and get out of this if you can. Quick, leave everything else and make for the outside. It's your only chance. Do as I say and don't ask me to explain. I heard, yet was able only to repeat my frantic questions. Around me were the tombs and the darkness and the shadows. Below me, some peril beyond the radius of the human imagination. But my friend was in greater danger than I, and through my fear I felt a vague resentment that he should deem me capable of deserting him under such circumstances. More clicking, and after a pause, a piteous cry from Warren. Beat it! For God's sake, put back the slab and beat it, Carter! Something in the boyish slang of my evidently stricken companion unleashed my faculties. I formed and shouted a resolution. Warren, brace up! I'm coming down! But at this offer, the tone of my auditor changed to a scream of utter despair. Don't! You can't understand! It's too late, and my own fault! Put back the slab and run! There's nothing else you or anyone can do now! The tone changed again, this time acquiring a softer quality as of hopeless resignation. Yet it remained tense through anxiety for me. Quick, before it's too late! I tried not to heed him, tried to break through the paralysis which held me and to fulfill my vow to rush down to his aid. But his next whisper found me still held inert in the chains of stark horror. Carter, hurry, it's no use, you must go. Better one than two. The slab. A pause, more clicking, then the faint voice of Warren. Nearly over now. Don't make it harder. Cover up those damned steps and run for your life. You're losing time. So long, Carter. I won't see you again. Here Warren's whisper swelled into a cry that gradually rose to a shriek, fraught with all the horror of the ages. Curse these hellish things, legions, my God, beat it, beat it, beat it. After that was silence. I know not how many interminable eons I sat stupefied, whispering, muttering, calling, screaming into that telephone. Over and over again through those eons I whispered and muttered, called, shouted, and screamed, Warren, Warren, answer me, are you there? And then there came to me the crowning horror of all, the unbelievable, unthinkable, almost unmentionable thing. I have said that eons seemed to elapse after Warren shrieked forth his last despairing warning, and that only my own cries now broke the hideous silence. But after a while there was a further clicking in the receiver, and I strained my ears to listen. Again I called down, Warren, are you there? And in answer heard the thing which has brought this cloud over my mind. I do not try, gentlemen, to account for that thing, that voice, nor can I venture to describe it in detail, since the first words took away my consciousness and created a mental blank which reaches to the time of my awakening in the hospital. Shall I say that the voice was deep, hollow, gelatinous, remote, unearthly, inhuman, disembodied? What shall I say? It was the end of my experience, and it's the end of my story. I heard it and knew no more. Heard it as I sat petrified in that unknown cemetery in the hollow amidst the crumbling stones and the falling tombs, the rank vegetation and the miasmal vapors. Heard it well up from the innermost depths of that damnable open sepulchre as I watched amorphous necrophagous shadows dance beneath an accursed waning moon. And this is what it said. You fool, Warren is dead. Zoe wants to get in my lap still. All right, I'm going to stop there, guys. I'm gonna duck out without hanging out to chat in case anyone has fallen asleep, so that I do not disturb their presumably already disturbed slumbers. I'll see you guys in the next one. I come in here and read for an hour every night at about 12:30 lately. I got some more Lovecraft. I think what's next? Is it the Dunwich Horror? Oh, I think it's Mountains of Madness. Yeah. No. Maybe. I don't know what I'm talking about. It's not at all it's The Color Out of Space. Which is relatively short, so I'll read a couple other short ones to go with it. Maybe Cats of Ulthar, maybe something else. I'll see you guys there. Thanks for subscribing. Thank you for the donations. You guys are awesome. You guys, you guys are supporting me enough to make life livable. I'm glad I can do something that's useful for you guys. I'll see you in the next one.